Drew McIntyre and Jacob Fatu just got jumped backstage, and the footage that leaked is absolutely insane. But here's what's going to make your blood boil: WWE tried to keep this quiet. They didn't want you to see what really happened in that hallway, and now we know exactly why. This wasn't just an attack. This was a calculated assassination attempt that has completely shattered the entire Smackdown locker room. And before you tell me I'm overreacting, wait until you hear who was behind this ambush and what they were caught saying on the production mics that weren't supposed to be recording. The audio that's circulating right now is going to change everything you thought you knew about the current power structure in WWE. Someone's getting fired over this leak, but that's the least of WWE's problems right now. Let me paint you the complete picture of what went down, because what you saw on television was maybe 30% of the actual chaos that erupted. Multiple sources inside the building have confirmed that this wasn't some spontaneous backstage brawl. This was planned. This was coordinated. And the people who orchestrated it have been plotting this for weeks, right under everyone's noses. It started approximately 45 minutes before SmackDown went live. Drew McIntyre had just finished up his pre-show production meeting with the creative team. He was walking through gorilla position, heading toward the locker room area, when suddenly the lights in that entire corridor section went dark. Not flickering, not dimming, completely black. And that's when all hell broke loose. Jacob Fatu, who had been in catering just minutes before, was making his way toward the same corridor from the opposite direction. He never saw it coming. Neither of them did. Because what happened next was something straight out of a military operation. 6 figures emerged from the shadows, and yes, we know exactly who they were, wearing all black gear, faces partially covered, and they moved with precision that suggested this had been rehearsed multiple times. The first person to reach Drew was hit with what witnesses described as a steel chair wrapped in black tape to muffle the sound. The impact sent Drew crashing into the concrete wall so hard that it left a visible dent. You can actually see it in the backstage segments from later in the show if you look closely behind the interview area. WWE tried to position plants and equipment in front of it, but you can still see the damage. Jacob Fatu heard the commotion and immediately charged toward the sound, because that's the kind of person he is. He's loyal to his family, loyal to his faction, and apparently now loyal to Drew McIntyre after their recent interactions on screen. But the attackers were ready for him. They had clearly studied his fighting style, his tendencies, his strengths. The moment Fatu came around that corner, he was met with not one, not two, but 3 super kicks simultaneously. The synchronized attack sent him stumbling backward, and that's when the real assault began. Here's where it gets absolutely disturbing. While this attack was happening, at least 15 WWE personnel were within earshot. Producers, stagehands, lower card talent getting ready for their matches, they all heard it. And according to multiple people who were there, not a single person intervened. Not because they were scared. Not because they didn't care. But because they were specifically instructed not to. One production assistant, who's choosing to remain anonymous for obvious reasons, told us that a high-level WWE official was standing just feet away from the attack with their arms crossed, watching it unfold with what they described as a satisfied smirk. When someone tried to run and get help, this official allegedly put their hand up and said, and I quote, "Let them handle their business." Let that sink in for a moment. This wasn't just an attack that WWE failed to prevent. This was an attack that someone in power actively allowed to happen. That's not speculation. That's based on direct eyewitness testimony from people who were actually there and have now come forward because they're disgusted by what they witnessed. The attack itself lasted approximately 4 minutes, though witnesses say it felt like an eternity. Drew McIntyre, despite being hit first and being outnumbered, fought back like an absolute warrior. He managed to grab one of the attackers and deliver a Glasgow kiss headbutt so devastating that the person was seen later with a visible gash across their forehead that required immediate medical attention. But every time Drew would gain momentum, another attacker would strike from his blind spot. Jacob Fatu took the worst of it. Because of his Samoan heritage and his reputation for having an incredibly high pain tolerance, the attackers seemed to specifically target him with the most brutal shots. One witness described seeing Fatu take a running knee strike directly to the temple that would have knocked out most human beings. He stumbled but didn't go down, so they hit him again, and again, and again. The 4th knee strike finally sent him to the ground, and that's when they started stomping. The audio that leaked, and if you haven't heard it yet, trust me, you need to find it because it's absolutely damning, captures one of the attackers saying, "This is for thinking you run the show. This is for thinking you're untouchable. Your time is done. That statement alone reveals this wasn't about a current storyline. This was about backstage politics. This was about power. This was about sending a message to anyone who thought they could rise up the ranks without permission from the established guard. Security finally arrived on the scene, but here's what's suspicious about that timing. The attack lasted 4 minutes. WWE's backstage security protocols state that any physical altercation should have security response within 90 seconds maximum. So where were they for those extra 2.5 minutes? Who delayed the call? Who made sure the attackers had enough time to inflict maximum damage? When security did arrive, the 6 attackers scattered in different directions. But here's what's fascinating, not a single one of them was apprehended. Not one. In a building with security cameras in virtually every corridor, with dozens of WWE personnel who could have pointed out which direction they went, somehow all 6 attackers managed to vanish without a trace. Either these are the most skilled escape artists in human history, or someone made sure they had a clear path out. Drew McIntyre was helped to his feet by the medical staff, and according to people who saw him immediately after, he was absolutely furious. Not at the attackers, at WWE management. He was reportedly shouting about how this was allowed to happen and demanding to know who gave the order. That's a direct quote from someone who was standing right there. Drew knows this was sanctioned. He knows someone in power wanted this to happen. Jacob Fatu required more immediate medical attention. He was escorted to the trainer's room where he was evaluated for a potential concussion. The fact that he was still able to compete later in the evening speaks to his incredible toughness, but multiple sources have confirmed that he was strongly advised not to perform. He ignored that advice because, in his words, "If I don't go out there, they win. And I don't lose to cowards who attack in the dark." Now let's talk about who was behind this attack, because the evidence is starting to point in a very specific direction. The 6 attackers were all wearing black, but several witnesses noticed distinctive details. One of them had a very specific tattoo visible on their forearm. Another had a unique gait, a slight limp on their left side. A third was noticeably shorter than the others, maybe 5'8" at most. These details matter because there are only so many people on the Smackdown roster that fit these descriptions. The leading theory right now, and this is coming from multiple independent sources who don't talk to each other, is that this attack was orchestrated by a faction that feels threatened by the rising popularity of Drew McIntyre and the legitimacy that Jacob Fatu brings to the Bloodline storyline. There's a group of established main eventers who have been extremely vocal backstage, though never on camera, about feeling like their spots are being threatened by the new generation of talent that WWE is pushing. One name that keeps coming up in these conversations is particularly interesting, and I'm not going to say it outright because I don't want to get sued, but if you've been following WWE Backstage politics for the last year, you know exactly who I'm talking about. This person has a history of being territorial about their position, has connections to old-school mentality talent who believe in paying your dues through backstage politics rather than in-ring performance, and was notably absent from the building at the exact time this attack occurred despite being scheduled to be there. The timing of their absence is suspicious for another reason. This person made a big show on social media about having to handle a personal emergency right before Smackdown started. But multiple people who follow their social media closely noticed they were liking tweets and posting Instagram stories during the exact time frame when the attack happened. So either they're handling a personal emergency while actively on social media, or the emergency was a convenient excuse to not be present when chaos erupted. What makes this even more infuriating is how WWE has handled it publicly. The official statement released by WWE described it as an unfortunate incident involving several superstars and promised a thorough internal investigation. That's corporate speak for, "We're going to pretend to care until this blows over." There's been no mention of police involvement, which should immediately tell you everything you need to know. If this was a real assault, law enforcement would be involved. The fact that it's being handled internally means WWE wants complete control over the narrative. The most disturbing part of WWE's response is what they told Drew and Jacob privately. According to sources close to both men, they were essentially given an ultimatum: either work this into a storyline and let WWE capitalize on the publicity, or keep quiet about it and WWE will handle it behind closed doors. Both men reportedly rejected the first option because they felt it would be disrespectful to the severity of what happened and would let the attackers off the hook by making it just part of the show. But here's where it gets really interesting. WWE has apparently decided to move forward with storyline ramifications anyway, whether Drew and Jacob cooperate or not. There are rumors that the next SmackDown episode is going to feature heavily edited footage of the attack, presented as if it was a worked angle all along. This would allow WWE to profit from the controversy while simultaneously gaslighting the audience into thinking this was all planned entertainment. The wrestlers' court that allegedly took place the following day is another story entirely. For those who don't know, wrestlers' court is an old-school tradition where the locker room handles internal disputes without management involvement. Multiple wrestlers gathered to discuss what should be done about the attack, and the meeting reportedly became extremely heated. There were accusations thrown around about who knew what and when. Some veterans defended the attackers, saying they were just doing what needed to be done. Others, particularly younger talent, were absolutely disgusted by that attitude. Drew McIntyre apparently gave an impassioned speech about how this kind of old-school mentality is exactly what's wrong with wrestling and why so many talented people leave the industry traumatized. He called out specific people by name for enabling toxic behavior and protecting bullies just because they've been around longer. Jacob Fatu backed him up, bringing up incidents from his time in other promotions where similar attacks led to serious injuries and even ended careers. The most powerful moment, according to someone who was there, was when a veteran wrestler, someone with decades in the business who's usually quiet about backstage politics, stood up and said that if this is how WWE is going to operate, they wanted no part of it anymore. This person has been with the company for years, is widely respected, and makes good money. For them to publicly consider walking away sent shockwaves through that meeting. What happened after wrestlers' court is equally troubling. The wrestlers who spoke up in defense of Drew and Jacob have reportedly been quietly removed from upcoming creative plans. Matches that were scheduled have been cancelled. Storylines that were building momentum have been abruptly dropped. The message is clear: if you stand against the established power structure, you'll pay for it with your career trajectory. Meanwhile, the suspected attackers have all been prominently featured on WWE programming since the incident. They're getting more TV time, bigger matches, and better storylines. Coincidence? Absolutely not. This is WWE's way of rewarding loyalty to the old guard while punishing those who dare to speak out against injustice. The fan reaction to all of this has been fascinating to watch. Social media has been absolutely on fire with people demanding answers, demanding accountability, demanding that WWE take this seriously instead of treating it like storyline fodder. The hashtag that's been trending, I won't say it here because I don't want to give WWE any ideas for how to suppress it, has been used hundreds of thousands of times in just the past few days. Fans are organizing, they're making noise, and they're refusing to let this be swept under the rug. Some fans have even started analyzing the Smackdown footage frame by frame, trying to identify the attackers based on body language, height, build, and any visible characteristics. It's like a true crime investigation but for professional wrestling. And honestly, the detective work some of these fans are doing is more thorough than WWE's official investigation. There's also been discussion about the broader implications of this attack on WWE's workplace culture. If something this violent can happen in front of multiple witnesses with apparent approval from management, what does that say about wrestler safety? What does that say about WWE's commitment to protecting their performers? These are human beings with families, with lives outside wrestling, and they deserve to work in an environment where they're not worried about being ambushed in a dark hallway. Several former WWE wrestlers have now come forward with their own stories of backstage attacks and hazing incidents that were swept under the rug. The pattern that's emerging is deeply troubling. There's apparently a long history of using violence and intimidation to enforce hierarchies and punish people who don't fall in line with how things have always been done. And management's response has consistently been to protect the aggressors rather than the victims, especially when the aggressors are top merchandise sellers or have connections to powerful people in the company. The financial implications of this situation are also worth discussing. Drew McIntyre is one of WWE's most reliable main eventers and a top merchandise seller. Jacob Fatu has brought renewed credibility to the Bloodline storyline, which is one of WWE's most valuable intellectual properties right now. If either of them were seriously injured in this attack, WWE would have lost significant revenue. The fact that WWE was willing to risk that by allowing this attack to happen suggests that whoever sanctioned it believed the political benefit outweighed the financial risk. There's also the question of what this means for WWE's relationship with their Saudi Arabia partners and other international deals. WWE has been positioning themselves as a premium, professional entertainment product. But if news of backstage violence and management-sanctioned attacks reaches mainstream media, it could damage their reputation with corporate partners who expect a certain level of professional conduct. The locker room morale right now is reportedly at an all-time low. Wrestlers don't know who to trust. They don't know if management will protect them if something happens. They don't know if speaking up will cost them their careers. This is creating an environment of fear and paranoia that's going to affect the quality of the product. When wrestlers are more worried about politics than performance, everyone loses, especially the fans. What should happen next? First, there needs to be a genuine independent investigation, not one conducted by WWE where they can control the outcome. Bring in an outside firm that specializes in workplace violence to interview witnesses, review footage, and determine exactly what happened and who was responsible. Second, anyone who was involved in planning or executing this attack needs to face real consequences, not just token punishments. And third, WWE needs to implement comprehensive policy changes to ensure this never happens again. But will any of that actually happen? Based on WWE's track record, probably not. They'll wait for the outrage to die down, maybe throw out some vague statement about taking workplace safety seriously, and then continue operating exactly as they have been. Unless fans continue to apply pressure, unless wrestlers continue to speak out despite the risks, unless sponsors and partners start asking uncomfortable questions, nothing will fundamentally change. This is bigger than Drew McIntyre and Jacob Fatu. This is about the soul of professional wrestling and whether we're going to continue accepting toxic behavior just because it's tradition. The fans have more power than they realize. Your engagement, your voice, your willingness to demand better, that's what can actually force change. So keep talking about this. Keep demanding accountability. Don't let WWE memory hole this incident like they've done with so many others.